residents and visitors of St. Eustatius. Today, July 1, is Emancipation Day. Emancipation Day in the former Dutch colonies. When I say former Dutch colonies, I'm talking about Suriname, Curaçao, Aruba, Bonaire, Saba, and St. Eustatius. These parts of the world, islands in the Caribbean Sea, 6, and Suriname being a part of the mainland South America, but yet bordering on the Caribbean Sea. These were just some of the islands in the Caribbean. In fact, all islands in the Caribbean at one time or another was a slave plantation or slave breeding ground, but something to do with the exploitation of the people of Africa by the people of Europe, also the North America and South America. These were all places where this brutal slavery of peoples of the African race took place. Now, when we speak of emancipation, I notice something that a lot of the young folks in Statia, today when they say emancipation, they say, well, what this is, we want to know about it. Some of the old folks try to shun it. And how to call it again, some educated fools try to deny it and hide it. But it takes all kinds to make a world. And we have to quote a great son of Africa, because Marcus Garvey was born in Jamaica, the son of an ex-slave, but he, at a stage through his career, which ran from like in the 1919 to 1930, at one stage he was proclaimed provincial king of Africa. And for me, I think Mr. Garvey is one of Africa's greatest sons ever. And one of the things that Marcus Garvey said is, Garvey said, a people without a knowledge of their past history and culture is like a tree without roots. Therefore, it is important that the young generations of black people, not only in Statia, but throughout the Western Hemisphere, from Brazil up to Canada and covering every Caribbean, and some of them ain't even in the Caribbean, some of the islands will lay off and around South America, but that are today inhabited by blacks, people who are the descendants of slaves, who our young generations end up traumatized. And sometimes we hear grown and educated people wondering what the problem is with the youth today. They don't understand the youth behavior, not realizing that is the things we've been teaching the youth in their daily history is what happened to be the foundation of the behavior we see in the youth today. I'm going to use just two small examples and then we go back to emancipation. If we take Statia, take our picture, we celebrate the 16th of November, which have nothing to do with black people in Statia. Fact is, the only thing the 16th of November had to do with black people in Statia is that after 1776, when this little fracas with Rodney and after the salute to this American brigadier Andrew Doria. The living conditions for the slaves and even the free blacks who were at that time on this island, the living conditions for them came about 3 times worse than it was previously. Because we have to remember, before 1776, St. Eustatius was one of the most, if not the most, prosperous port in the Caribbean with business flourishing. And when I say business flourishing, it was not all good business. For example, there was the house of prostitution right on the bayfront, run till all in the early 1920s when they had whale ships coming in, a place called the Green Light. Apart from that, the main business that St. Eustatius was flourishing in the 16, 17, early 1800s was in the trade in human flesh. That means to say the buying and selling of our ancestors. Actually, the Dutch people, as it is recorded, who today we still bear Dutch passports, but I walk with a little paper here because it's important. Most people see things and don't look at them, but this paper has some of the information that is on a board right on the bayfront, just when you cross the corner from the Smoke Alley restaurant. There is a board, a sign up there, and the sign says water fort or slave fort. But anyway, it said it was built somewhere around 1724, this particular fort. And this fort, the main purpose of this slave fort, in reality, the fort was a slave market, because before they built this fort in 1724, it was said the slave ships would come in from Africa. After a 2 to 3 month journey, they would bring our ancestors packed like sardine in the cargo hold of ship. Butt naked, man, woman, and children, everybody chained together, vomit on one another, urine on one another, do the feces on one another. You go through the journey, and people don't like to hear this, but I have to say this because people refer always to the Jewish Holocaust to describe horrible situations that happen to humanity. But some people don't know, some conveniently forgot the tribulation that our forefathers been through. Because according to history, for the black people who sitting in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm talking about the people that we can today say belong to the Western Hemisphere due to the situation of slavery, we end up being today from this part of the world, although we are African descendants. The journey to have us here on this part of the world, it said they extracted 30 million people out of Africa during the days of slavery from in the 1619 time leading up to about early 1800 when they abolished the slave trade. But then anyway, so they take 30 million Africans out of Africa, of which approximately 65 to 70% of those folks made it to this side of the world, made it across the Atlantic Ocean. In history, it is recorded where ship captains, some average load that they would took on a slave ship, depends on the size, but the average load was 500-600 heads of people they would come with. And it is recorded in the world history from all the countries that worked the slave trade, of which I must repeat, the Dutch West India Company was one of the main players in the slave trade game. These guys would deliberately take, okay, we taking our 600, but with a meditation that when we reach across the Atlantic, we're gonna have 400 left, because it was common, anybody who felt sick on board that ship on the journey, they didn't waste food on someone who was sick and weak. They threw them overboard live. If it happened that they met bad weather on the journey, they again would send a man in the cargo hold or two and they check out, okay, these don't look so weak, or this is a woman. Well, we throw another 20 overboard, lighten the ship so that we can get through the storm. This was the reality of the slave trade. This is how it happened. When a slave ship reached into, example, this port, St. Eustatius, like I say, was a main slave trading port, that before they build the slave fort, the ship would stay out on anchor, and throughout the morning they would unload 300-400 men, women, children, our ancestors. Like I said, every one of them starved naked. Well, they would throw some water over them when they're bringing them in to sell. But I must say, when they were delivered in Africa to the point where they would be shipped from, which they had a few points, but there was one they call the Gate of No Return in Senegal. There at that point, the ship, the slaves, our foreparents that were being loaded on a ship for, at that point, the Dutch Caribbean and the places where a Dutch slave ship would stop first would be St. Eustatius, mainly, or Curacao, or sometimes they would go straight to what is known in the US of A as New York today. At that point, it was New Amsterdam, a Dutch colony. They would go into New Amsterdam, and they would many times reship slaves from here to any of the Dutch colonies. But I'm saying when these slaves, our foreparents, reached to the point in Africa from where they would be shipped out, the way how, if you look at the cowboy movies, the way you see them brand cattle with a hot iron, our foreparents were stamped with WIC on them, which is the West India, the brand of the the Dutch West India Company. That was their brand. After 2-3 months, a journey on the ocean, which had to be a horrible journey, because we have to understand many of these folks came from the inland of Africa. Many of them had seen the ocean for the very first time in their lives when they were about to start that journey that they brought them on. And like I said, when they brought them in here, they would bring in 300 or 400 people in the morning before the slave fort was built. line them up somewhere on the bayfront after they wash them down with some seawater. And then the merchants, the farmers, because at that point it was said that Statia, this 11 square mile island, it was to supply labor for the cane fields. It was predominantly cane at that point, cotton, and a bit of tobacco came a little later and so. But it took, the need was to have 3,000 Africans brought in here as slaves per year to keep these plantations operating, because these are things people don't like to hear. But the fact is, the program that every slave operator had, it was simply you work your slaves, work them to death, feed them poor, beat them, work them extremely hard. So the mission was to starve them out, work them out, exterminate them, some saying you work them to death and replace them when they one dead, because they said it was cheaper to replace a slave than to have a sick or weak slave. So these are the things that our forefathers been through. And to see that after all that, well, look at us, we still here, strong, black and rebellious to this day, although some say we are too passive on this island. And I agree, in many instances, we are too passive, because when you examine the whole plan, if you look at it, 1619, the first officially registered slave ship. So it's possible that they had contraband slaves from illegal ships went into the US before. But in 1619, the first officially registered slave ship sailed into Virginia, and it was a Dutch ship. First load of slaves into America. 1652, Dutchmen led under a man by the name of Jan van Krale arrived in South Africa, and we know from then it ended up in apartheid till about 1990, before we break the apartheid cycle. Now, if we look closer, and I want to say emancipation, I want to stress how important it is for people on this island to honor and respect their foreparents for all the things they went through, so that we can be here today. When I look, they're going to say don't talk about this, but I can't resist talking about it. And I will say every time, when I check in the last 2 years, our government spent somewhere over 90,000 guilders for the past 2 Novembers to prepare a program for Statia America Day. I explained earlier that the only thing this so-called Statia America Day in 1776 did for us was make life harder for the blacks who were on this island, enslaved as well as freed blacks. And then I believe the year when the Taken brought all our school children in an exam year, take them out of school in Curacao, Aruba, St. Martin, wherever they were, and fly them in to celebrate the 16th of November. That year the cost was even about the 90-some thousand that they run in the last years. And I saying all these things to say, if we do not respect our ancestors, no one is going to respect us. So when I watched the TV a couple of weeks back, and I heard the governor and Melbourne and all of these people getting sick on how the youth them, what they say? The youth them turning violent, they ain't gonna respect and all these kind of things. You know, when we need to examine these things closely, because the youth them violent, the youth them may have no respect. But let's look at the people who has been presented to our youth as heroes. I mean, from your school book up. They teach you, they teach us, for example, about a European crusader, bishop by the name of Bamabere, who went around converting people to religion at the point of his sword. And you know the history of that, the European, what it taught us with these crusaders, they would operate, go as far as the Middle East, turning people to Christianity at the point of a sword. And these people they teach us about. They teach us about Christopher Columbus, and you know the dark tales that Christopher Columbus and his entourage left behind. There's one in the Bahamas that went down, it was pertaining to his son Diego. When the Indians realized that these people weren't just passing through, they came to take over the land. The Indians, being honorable people and did things head on, they said to these guys, look, we realize you ain't planned to go. And so they came about, they made an agreement with the Spanish for a fair fight, a daylight they would meet on the beach to fight, for a fight of which the victor would keep the island and the losers would sail out in the horizon. But the European, being deceitful and dishonest people throughout all generations, moving in the night and slaughter the Indians while they were still asleep. So I'm just showing you the tribulations that this world have seen since those folks, since they said that Columbus sailed the ocean to find this world for me and you, which is as far as from the truth as you can get, because every port where Columbus stepped on, he met folks there. And back to the slavery thing, wherever Columbus went, they enslaved, then they annihilated, they killed all the Indian people who they met, the indigenous people couldn't stand up to the European diseases and all that they brought. So they say, well boy, we will start to pull in Africa, and them fella tough, Jan van Kraal and them done experience with them down in South Africa, and they could walk through anything. So they start to pull black people in and start to slaughter them, start to walk them in the most unhumane ways. There are records I have read, Think It Next Door, where a Mr. Aquino, a well-known author throughout this world, man, an African man, was a sailor, among other things, sailed out of this port of Oranjestad. But he gave an account of a slave woman he saw working in a kitchen in St. Kitts, in one of the rich people kitchen. And this lady had on what they call, I think they call, but anyways, a kind of necklace with big iron spikes in this necklace sticking out all around, and they had this on the lady because she tried to escape one time. So if you try to escape, if they didn't kill you, they did the most humiliating and inhumane things to keep you in place. But it's a whole long story, something that cannot be told in no hour. Our story is a lifetime it would take to explain. But I just want to show you we in slavery, and I've been through where they brought our folks to shore from the ships to the shore with the stamp of the Dutch West India Company branded in the flesh. When you came in, and for example, the dreaded and famous Mr. Moore, the one who ran the Golden Rock Plantation, if Mr. Moore came down and bought 20 of the slaves that came on the ship, then Mr. Moore at that point, apart from the brand of the Dutch West India Company that you got before leaving Africa, Mr. Moore would put his branding iron on you when you get here again, so they know that you were considered property of this Mr. Moore. And now I want to say, this thing I have here is the proclamation of the abolishment of slavery in the Dutch territories. But I'm going to say that the Dutch, the British, the French, the American, no slaveholder abolished slavery because they had a soft heart or good feelings for the slaves. They started to abolish slavery after the Haitian revolt, when black people everywhere start to realize that, hey, if in Haiti the man could overthrow Accra and take over, we're going to do it too. And so we start to get uprisings all through the territories. I mean, extremely bloody revolts. And at a point, it started to be not so economically feasible to run slaves with all the revolts, because at a stage people didn't care if they were murdered anymore. They would burn the cane field, they would destroy everything, they would sabotage that the slave owners had. And then, due to the writings of this Mr. Aquino that I mentioned again, the African who passed through here, and a few others, many of the so-called Christian people start to get a heart and start to raise a voice for the abolition of slavery, which was a tough and rough fight. So the slaves were fighting slavery, the abolitionists started to preach against it, and at the same time in Europe and even in America, they started to develop some machines. Some of these machines, particularly in America, were developed by the very enslaved Africans who they brought over. So, bit by bit, with all kind of pressures, the French, after the Haitians, because they kicked loose slavery like 100 years before everybody else, they threw out the French. And then the French territories started to gain independence, not independence, and freedom from slavery. They started to abolish the French government. The British followed them. The Dutch came along in 1863, sorry, and abolished slavery. But by that time, all these slaving countries had mega millionaires evolved from the slave trade. And going back to the 16th of November 1776, like I said earlier, after that particular incident or the salute to the flag, it became harder for the enslaved people on these islands. Take example, across the front of the mansion from the Congo Cemetery going south, there was a pocket of free blacks through this period. And after the 1776 salute, in 1783, the Dutch put some laws in place that said, example, free blacks couldn't have firearms anymore, they couldn't have swords no more, they weren't allowed to have horses, they weren't allowed to assemble. And that particular law, they keep upgrading that law right up to 1810. These laws saying that blacks couldn't assemble, blacks couldn't do this and couldn't do that. So I'm saying, just want to emphasize to our people, if we need to celebrate something, we need to celebrate Emancipation Day. And because after Emancipation Day came in 1863, there was still severe restrictions on the black population of all these territories. For one, the mass of the people was still committed to the plantation because back 1863 they cut people loose from slavery, but they didn't give you no economic empowerment. There you were free from slavery, no house to live because you lived on Mr. Somebody plantation, no money, no clothing. And the commitment was that for the first 5 or 10 years, slavery had officially ended, but slavery still went on. Slavery in the sense that, like I say, the people had nothing, they were committed to the plantation. And so you worked for the Mr. Moores and the Mr. Everybody else for no pay because you took shelter in the shanty or his plantation where you lived when you was his slave. And when the law say that you had to get 2 nickels, they deducted food and deducted clothes and rent out of it. So at the end of the day, you were still indebted, you were owing these people, so you were tied to the plantations due to the debt what you had. So it was still a form of slavery taking place. We've been through our forefathers extremely rough times up to the 1930s, 1940s. For a few years back when I've been to a radio program on Emancipation Day, I walked with some other information that I have at home where I show you that up to the 1930s under the colonial era, there were periods when the population of this island was starving. And these things are recorded in the National Archives, all there in the records, because just like I smiled the other day when I read this newspaper called, this paper for the best islands, I think Arco or something like that the paper's called. But when I read the Dutch Mauritius, they did an interview with them and they make a statement saying like basically their job here is to observe, record, and they send it off to Holland. So it flipped my mind a little back to the colonial era because I'm thinking, well, back in the colonial era they recorded everything and send it off to Curacao, where it would be later transferred to Holland, or the Dutch representative there at the time would just absorb it all and, to get it to Holland later on. But we need to respect our culture, we need to respect our history, because whether we like it or not, slavery is part of our history. Our foreparents being through that tribulation, we, all the people of African descendants who you meet, black people anywhere in this region, and I'm not talking about the one or two people that just come from Nigeria and so today to go to the medical school. I'm talking about what is considered the genuine Caribbean or regional people. Them people are all we are all byproducts of slavery. So when you hear people talking, thinking that, yeah, I'm from this island, so I'm better than the island, is all nonsense. We are all byproducts of slavery. Whether you're Suriname black, Brazil black, St. Kitts black, Grenada black, Georgia black, Virginia black, or Statia black, you are descendants of slaves. And we should be proud of it when we consider that during slavery, the program was to work you to death and replace you. Say that our ancestors must have been the strongest people that set foot on this earth. But the fact that they were the strongest people is understandable, because they were the original people. And when you check history today, we found out that the white man, the yellow man, the red man, all of them came out of our mama belly, because today history tell you that every race of people on this earth originally came out of Africa, just due to the migration and ending up in different places. People end up with different complexion. But when you check the DNA today, well, you could find my melanin in a Chinese girl's skin. Or you could find me in one of them blue-eyed Nordish girl. So I think it was really foolish of the European people that they, although they did it for economic gains, but the mission where they would try, they tried to exterminate the African to work them to death, hasn't been successful then. They infected them with all kind of diseases after that through the generations. And you know what? We're still here. They still can't take us out. And we're going to be here as long as this earth here. But back to my 11 square miles, I'm going to say, over the years, for the last people that celebrated Emancipation Day in the spirit of our forefathers on Statia is the Rastafarian movement, and I have to say, is when we were boys. And they fought us so hard because people from a certain age don't know, all my kids, young, and even some youth in the 20-something don't know the tribulations we went through for wearing dreadlocks. For there was a time in this very Caribbean. Fact is, the first discrimination I ever experienced was from black people like myself, and it was for wearing dreadlocks in this very Caribbean. This is real. There were periods in the end of the 70s up to the middle and late 80s when Rasta couldn't go to Antigua, couldn't go to Nevis, couldn't go to St. Kitts, couldn't go to St. Martin, couldn't go to Totola. In fact, it's telling this new time where we in the 2000s before Rastas can freely go into Totola. And it had to take a man to take them to the World Court to the UN for discrimination before they lift the ban in Totola. And Totola, just like Antigua and St. Kitts, all of us are totally black countries, all descendants of slaves. So we facing all kind of thing, and we facing it rough on this particular island in the days when we started to celebrate Emancipation, the end of the 70s, coming up to the middle of the 80s, with no help from no government, no institution. In fact, we were persecuted locally for celebrating Emancipation Day. Sure, there were some real good old folks who knew how it was when they were young. People like Miss Marshall in the South, my aunt Miss King, Dolly, her mother Miss Natty, and Miss Joe was the other lady. All these ladies came across whenever we celebrated, and they were there with us in the park when we cooked. And they did everything with us there. We had them, they said we were spoiling them because they were 6 and 7 o'clock people. We could have had them out till 2 in the morning. But then, the people, the guardians of culture of the day, people like Miriam Smith and Ishmael Burkle and Ellis Lopes and all these folks, they sabotaged, they took it, they did nothing with it all the years, but after they see that we were doing a successful thing, they took it over, say the culture department, how to do these things, and the culture department effectively managed to kill it. Nora Snake, this was another one of the crucifiers of the Emancipation Day celebrations on this island, talking about real heartical celebrations. And if we watch over the last years, I have to say that the governments, and I ain't picking choosing none now, from 1984 time up to now, so I say over the last 25 or so years, all who sat in government did their utmost to stifle the Emancipation Day celebrations, to stifle the memories of their forefathers. And I don't know if it came about where at a stage we get a lot of educated people start to come in and run the island. I don't notice one thing about educated people in this region. For many years I've been monitoring them, and I notice them, once they get a certain degree of education, they tend to feel above the people and the culture and the things that they grew with. For some reason, they seem to, when they get a white man education, they actually turn white in the mind, and the things that they knew, the things they grew with, the things that are part of their culture and their history, those things are of no significance to them again. And I say that to say this. For example, I recall a few years back when we got our second son of the soil as a lieutenant governor. He, together with the tourist department, in fact it seemed like the whole executive council, they spend trip after trip running the seaboard from New York to Virginia and back. Say they're looking for, what they call them, investors to build a replica of the Andrew Doria. They said they need $3 million US to do that. We'll probably spend $250,000 on the trips that they make running up and down looking for investors. But no investor take them on because they realize these people walking in the dark. Example, if I take a lot of the English-speaking islands, if I take many areas of America, Virgin Islands included, Emancipation Day is doctored to be a great tourist attraction. But here, we seem to be ashamed of it. To this day, we cannot get a government in this island territory. In fact, it seems like none of the Antillean islands who willing to invest not 10, not 15, not 25,000. We can't find a government who willing to invest 100 guilders in an Emancipation Day celebration. They don't bring it on the school curriculum, they ain't teaching it on the street. And why I say we can't find a government who want to do that? If we take example, I go back 16th of November, nothing to do with black people. Every black on this island was enslaved at the time. If you watch governors, senators, commissioners, island council members, leaders of the clergy, members of every church, every civic group, 5 o'clock in the morning, like a set of roast breadfruit, you could find them, whether it rain or what, they down in the fort, they all over doing all kind of foolishness. And how to call it foolishness, because when I see a set of black people imitating a total white action, I how to call it foolishness. And when I see that same set of black people have no respect for their ancestors, no respect for their culture, then I have to wonder if we sick or if in the education. Because for the 16th of November, the government yearly for generations now, they invest the whole public work department for the 2 weeks before preparing for November 16. They set up a special executive committee that could spend money freer than the finance department. They could spend 90,000 and more. Nobody how to get records for it. Whatever they do for the 16th is good. Fact is, if they had more money available, they'd spend more. They spend themselves in debt. According to what I heard, they spend even money that Usona had designated for other things, the government borrowed to put in their November 16th celebration, which due to that end up to derail the Usona operation for a number of years. No organization on this island could have get funding due to that. Now I'm going to say, I mentioned Mr. Aquino, and another time I'm going to go in details about him, because it's one of the folks who we can build a statue here to as a national hero. But I'm going to say, the letter of the army, like I said, the whole of public work, the whole of the labor department, the protocol people, most everybody in the government civil service, if you want to get to fool around a while, the 2 weeks leading up to November 16th, all you need to do is say, well, be preparing and you ain't going to show up at the office or nowhere. You go down the street there and hang around all day with the building stage and painting and doing everything to accommodate this their hypocrisy. They spend money bringing dignitaries from around the region to celebrate this lie with them. But today, July 1 Emancipation Day, I think it's about 145 years now since our forefathers managed to get out of that cruel bondage. And you know, we don't have no celebration, no official speeches from governor, senator, commissioner, council member, no prayers from the clergy, none. Nobody care about the soul of some wretched black African people who, unfortunately, them wretched black African people happened to be our forefathers. They are the reason why we are here today. And these things bother me because when I get people in authority tell me it is of no significance, the emancipation business, then I say, these people need more teaching. They need to know their history because they live in limbo and they want to teach our children to live in limbo. Because when our children, being black, how no heroes or heroines, I think you call the lady heroes, to look up to. Heroes that are of their same complexion, with the same grippy hair. Heroes that your granny before you and your aunt and grandpa could relate to. Until you present such heroes to your children, to our children always going to have problems and they're going to be suffering from a confusion in their minds no matter how good an education we give them, because they're never going to be able to settle in if they don't know who they are. You have to know who you are to find and to claim your place in the world, because you could be the very best accountant on this earth. You only could play with numbers if you don't know your roots, if you don't know who you are. You're lost in the real world. And this is why we see these many educated people that we tend to have. They have to lock away in the fashionable cage at the end of the day because they are hollow inside. They cannot meet, they cannot converse with the real people because somehow this hyper-education, what they get, give them the impression that they are above the common man, not realizing that the common man is their foundation. God bless. I believe I talk too much. But before I want to make this one little thing out of this paper, and this little paper, what we read is from is something like I say, you could go down close to Smoke Alley if you see they put up a plaque, it's saying these things on it. Just so you know the conditions our four people live in. The water fort, when they built the water fort, the slave fort on shore, it was a building measuring 54 foot by 21 foot wide. 2-story building, 2 flat empty floors, and it held 450 to 500 people. And like I said, they made no secret of it. Our forefathers who they brought as slaves here and handled as cargo. This is what we were on a cargo manifest We never had no passenger status or no slave ship or no slave period, because my Congo tribe wanted to kill me 2 November back when I jumped up on the stage at the end of the reggae show they had for the Emancipation Day. And I stated, for the November 16th, that I stated that on the lot right in front of the stage where Charlie Theatre, now Madam Theatre, sit. That yard there is where the so-called Governor de Graaf lived. And on the same day, when they fired a salute to the Andrew Doria, that Governor Johannes de Graaf, who was a slave trader in his everyday business, Governor was secondary small money thing that he did for the West India Company. But if you go in the archives, you're going to find that on that very day, 16th of November 1776, after they saluted the Andrew Doria, that the Andrew Doria took on a load of gunpowder, provisions, molasses. They also bought from the then governor, Johannes de Graaf, the manifested 30 live ones. And when they say 30 live ones, they were referring to blacks, because, like I said, our forefathers and mothers were not handled or categorized by the slave owners and traders as human beings. We, if they were shipping us, we were on the manifest as live ones. And you would imagine that the 30 live ones who sailed out of station, was shipped out of station that day, that those 30 live ones, they had already had on them the brand with a hot iron of the West India Company they got before they left Africa. They came here and got the brand of the Graaf plantation on them here. And then whenever they reached to the US, whoever they were sold to, they would be rebranded with a hot iron again before they start another horrible journey of hardships in the US of A. Now, like I say, anybody could go down and check this out. And I'll show you how bad the slave trade business was here. It says in this little thing and it's on the plaque down there, by the turn of the 18th century, St. Eustatius had already established a trade reputation for itself within the Caribbean. In 1701, French and English merchants came to Statia to try to strike a deal with Commander Isaac Lamont, whereby Statia would supply them with 1,500 slaves each year for 100 pesos each. However, Lamont refused this offer because he believed he could make even higher profits. And let's say after the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, sugar plantations grew more prosperous on Statia, and the demand for enslaved Africans was high. According to a charter of the New West India Company, the colonies can only survive with black slaves or Negroes. And because nobody except the company, meaning the Dutch West India Company, who had a contract with the Dutch Crown, has the authority to get these slaves at the coast of Africa, the company will be obliged to deliver on a yearly basis a certain amount of slaves required to the colonies. However, the plantation owners believed that the Dutch West India Company did not provide them with enough enslaved Africans. Therefore, inevitably, an illegal trade developed with slave traders from other countries. During the 1660s to 70s, Curaçao later station became important transitional slave depots to America and the surrounding islands. So again, I want to beg the people of this community, if they have major concerns about how the youth them getting on today, teach the youth the right things, bring our black history to them in school. And I will say, the Netherlands, many other countries repented for what they did during the time of slavery. The Netherlands to this day refuse to repent. Our Prime Minister said he got nothing to apologize for that, the Dutch Prime Minister. But for 8 years, there is a monument in the Netherlands to the atrocities of slavery. For 7 years, he refused to go. But since the leader of the free world, a black, by the name of Mr. Hussein Obama, most probably going to be the next American president and the leader of the free world, Prime Minister Balkenende decided he going to the slavery memorial in Holland. Today he visited that memorial to repent for the atrocities that his foreparents committed.
Oh, pirates, yes, they behind. Stole I from the merchant ship. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. Be forward in this generation, triumphing. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? That's all I ever had. Redemption song.